The blood pooling beneath the dying man's body was the exact shade of crimson Elena Cortez had seen in 3 war zones, and she had 8 minutes before his heart stopped forever. The blizzard outside Mercy Point Regional Medical Center had transformed the Colorado night into a white void, wind screaming against reinforced windows like artillery fire. Inside the 4th-floor emergency department, Dr. Elena Cortez stood at the nurse's station reviewing trauma protocols when the ceiling lights flickered and the unmistakable thunder of rotor blades shook the building. A Marine helicopter, fighting 40-knot winds, was landing on the hospital roof. Before you continue, please subscribe to this channel and let us know where you're watching from in the comments. Stories like this need to be heard. Elena's combat instincts activated before her conscious mind caught up. She was moving toward the roof access corridor when the emergency doors exploded open. 2 Marine Corps medics burst through, uniforms coated in snow and something darker, pushing a gurney at full speed. The patient, male, approximately 50 years old, powerfully built despite obvious trauma, had no face visible beneath the oxygen mask, no identification on his torn civilian clothing, and a wound pattern Elena recognized instantly. Shrapnel. Military grade. Penetrating trauma to the lower right quadrant with probable arterial involvement. "Trauma 1. Now!" Elena commanded, her voice cutting through the sudden chaos. The medics veered toward the designated bay, but Hospital Administrator Victor Brennan materialized in the corridor like a bureaucratic ghost, tablet clutched to his chest. "Stop." Brennan's voice carried the authority of someone who'd never had to make a life-or-death decision in under 60 seconds. "Who authorized this admission? Where's the patient consent? Insurance verification?" Elena stared at him. "He's bleeding out. We need..." "Protocol, Dr. Cortez." Chief of Staff Dr. Philip Hargrove appeared beside Brennan, his expensive suit pressed despite the late hour. "No identification means no medical history, no consent forms. We need legal clearance before any invasive procedures." The patient's vital signs screamed from the portable monitor. Blood pressure dropping, heart rate climbing, oxygen saturation falling. Elena watched the numbers with the same sick certainty she'd felt in Navy field hospitals when bureaucracy moved faster than medicine. 8 minutes. Maybe less. "Get me a surgical kit," Elena said quietly to the trauma nurse beside her. "Dr. Cortez, I'm directing you to wait for..." Hargrove began. The monitor alarm changed pitch. The patient was crashing. Elena made her decision the same way she'd made it in Kandahar, in Baghdad, in Syrian field hospitals, where the only choice was between action and death. She dropped to her knees beside the gurney, her hands already assessing the wound through the hastily applied combat dressing. "Thoracotomy kit, crash cart, 2 units O negative. Move." The trauma nurses responded instantly, muscle memory overriding institutional hierarchy. Brennan's face flushed crimson. "Doctor. Cortez, you are not authorized to..." "I need a scalpel and 30 seconds of silence," Elena said, her voice carrying the cold precision of someone who'd performed this exact procedure while mortars fell around her. "You can fire me after he's alive." Her hands moved with brutal efficiency. The hallway became an impromptu surgical theater. Nurses positioning lights, a young resident frozen in horror as Elena performed a lateral thoracotomy using a crash cart as her operating table. Blood poured across sterile tile. Her fingers found the damaged artery, clamped it, bought the patient another 60 seconds of life. Suction. Retractor. "Talk to me about pressure." The numbers stabilized. Marginally. Enough. Security cameras mounted in the corridor ceiling captured everything. Elena's blood-soaked scrubs, Brennan's furious protests, the unnamed patient's chest rising and falling in shallow, living breaths. The surgical team finally arrived, took over, wheeled the patient toward the operating room with professional efficiency, now that someone else had done the impossible part. Elena stood slowly, her hands trembling now that the adrenaline was fading, and met Brennan's eyes. "My office, 6 a.m. His voice was ice-wrapped in satisfaction. "Bring your badge." Elena nodded once. She'd saved a life tonight using skills the Navy had taught her in war zones. And she'd just destroyed her career in the process. What she didn't know was that the man whose life she'd saved would remember everything. And in less than 24 hours, 400 United States Marines would make sure she never regretted her choice. But first, she had to survive the reckoning. Elena didn't sleep. She sat in her apartment watching the blizzard fade to gray dawn, her hands still trembling from adrenaline she couldn't shake. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw two faces: the unnamed patient gasping for air on that hallway floor, and another face from 7 years ago that haunted her in a completely different way. Lieutenant Michael Cortez, her younger brother, United States Marine Corps, 23 years old when he died. The memory arrived unbidden, sharp as shrapnel. A forward operating base in Syria. Michael's unit ambushed during a routine patrol, arterial bleeding that any combat medic could have stopped in 5 minutes. But the evacuation request got caught in a chain of command that prioritized paperwork over bleeding Marines. 27 minutes of bureaucratic delays. By the time the helicopter arrived, Michael was gone. Elena had been stationed 300 miles away, performing surgeries in a Navy field hospital, completely unaware her brother was dying while administrators debated authorization codes. She found out 6 hours later through official notification. Clean, professional, utterly destroying. That's when she'd made her promise. Never again would she let bureaucracy kill someone she could save. Never again would she wait for permission while someone bled out because administrators feared liability more than death. It's why she'd left the military. Why she'd come to Mercy Point Regional Medical Center, which served veteran populations across Colorado. Why she'd testified against Victor Brennan 6 months ago when he'd proposed cutting funding to the Veterans Rehabilitation Wing to finance a new executive conference center. And why Brennan had been waiting for exactly this kind of moment to destroy her. At 5:47 a.m., her phone buzzed. Marcus Chen, the hospital's senior nurse practitioner and former Army Ranger medic who understood combat decisions better than anyone else on staff. Don't come in. He's already drafted your termination papers. This was his plan all along. Elena stared at the message, then grabbed her keys. If Brennan wanted her gone, he'd have to look her in the eyes while he did it. The hospital felt different in early morning light. Quieter, almost peaceful, completely unaware of the execution about to take place in the executive suite. Elena walked past the hallway where she'd saved a life 12 hours earlier. Someone had cleaned the blood, but she could still see exactly where it had pooled. The board meeting was already underway when she arrived. Through the conference room windows, she could see Brennan standing at the head of the table, tablet in hand, presenting his case with the rehearsed confidence of someone who'd already won. Marcus intercepted her outside the room, his face grim. Elena, he's calling it reckless endangerment of institutional liability. He's got security footage, witness statements, everything framed to make you look like a rogue operator who endangered the hospital. The patient's alive because of what I did. I know. But Brennan's making this about protocol, not outcomes. He's been building a case against you since the Veterans Wing testimony. This unauthorized surgery is just his legal justification. Elena watched through the glass as board members nodded along with Brennan's presentation. None of them had ever held a dying patient. None of them understood the difference between following rules and saving lives. At 6 a.m. exactly, Brennan's assistant opened the conference room door. "Dr. Cortez, Mr. Brennan will see you now." The walk to his office felt longer than any patrol she'd walked in combat zones. At least in war, you knew who your enemies were. Brennan sat behind his mahogany desk, Patricia from HR positioned beside him like a legal guard. The termination papers were already spread across the desk, every paragraph crafted by lawyers who'd anticipated this exact scenario. Unauthorized medical intervention, violation of patient consent protocols, reckless endangerment of hospital liability standards. Brennan's voice carried the cold satisfaction of a man who'd waited months for this moment. Effective immediately. Your employment at Mercy Point Regional Medical Center is terminated for cause. Elena remained standing, her posture parade ground straight. I saved his life. You violated every protocol this institution holds sacred. Brennan slid the papers forward. Sign. You have 1 hour to clear your locker and surrender your credentials. Patricia wouldn't meet her eyes as Elena signed her name 4 times, each signature ending the career she'd built after leaving the military. The badge she'd worn for 12 years was placed in an envelope. Her access cards deactivated with a few keyboard clicks. Elena's hands gripped the steering wheel as she drove through melting snow, her entire career condensed into a cardboard box on the passenger seat. 12 years of medicine, 3 Navy tours, 4 years at Mercy Point, reduced to a framed diploma, a stethoscope, and a coffee mug with a faded anchor emblem. The termination letter sat on top, crisp and official. Terminated for cause meant no hospital in Colorado would touch her. Probably no hospital anywhere. Brennan would make sure of that. She pulled into her apartment complex at 8:47 a.m. and sat in the car, engine running, watching her breath fog the windshield. Her phone buzzed. Mom. Elena almost didn't answer, but Maria Cortez wasn't someone you ignored, especially when she had that specific tone in her voice, the one that said she already knew something was wrong. You got fired. Not a question. A statement delivered with the steel-edged certainty of a woman who'd buried one child and refused to lose another to institutional cowardice. How did you— Marcus called me an hour ago. Said you saved someone's life and they fired you for it. Her mother's voice carried the weight of a gold star mother who understood sacrifice better than most. Tell me you'd do it again. Elena closed her eyes. Without hesitation. Good. Because your brother would have done the same thing, Mija. Michael never waited for permission to do what was right. Neither should you. A pause, heavy with meaning. Never apologize for saving a life. You hear me? Never. Elena felt something crack open in her chest. Not grief, but something fiercer. Purpose. I won't. She ended the call and carried her box upstairs, already mentally updating her resume for hospitals in other states. Oregon, maybe. Washington. Somewhere far from Victor Brennan's reach. Meanwhile, 43 miles away, Mercy Point Regional Medical Center's ICU was experiencing something unprecedented. The patient in room 12, still listed as John Doe pending identification, began showing signs of consciousness at 9:15 a.m. ICU charge nurse Sandra Martinez noticed the subtle changes first. Increased eye movement beneath closed lids, fingers flexing against the hospital blanket, vitals strengthening beyond post-surgical expectations. She moved closer, checking monitors, and that's when she saw his arms fully exposed for the first time. The surgical team had been too focused on saving his life to catalog details. But Sandra had worked ICU for 19 years, and she recognized combat scarring when she saw it. His forearms carried the layered history of someone who'd survived multiple deployments. Shrapnel patterns, burn tissue, the distinctive marks of field surgeries performed under fire. This wasn't a civilian who'd been in one bad accident. This was a warrior who'd walked through war zones for decades. Dr. Patel, you need to see this, Sandra called to the attending physician. While medical staff gathered around the mystery patient, hospital security was conducting its own review 3 floors below. The director of security, Frank Vasquez, a former Marine himself, sat in the surveillance room watching footage from the hallway incident on continuous loop. What he saw made his jaw tighten with something between anger and respect. Dr. Elena Cortez performing a thoracotomy with the kind of precision that only came from combat experience, her hands moving with absolute certainty while administrators argued. The way she commanded nurses without raising her voice. The complete absence of hesitation when the patient crashed. Frank had served in Fallujah. He'd seen field medics work under mortar fire. What Elena did in that hallway was battlefield medicine translated to civilian spaces, and Brennan had fired her for it. He picked up his phone and called someone he hadn't spoken to in 6 months. Someone who needed to know what really happened before the official narrative buried the truth. In room 12, the patient's eyes opened at 10:03 a.m. Sandra leaned forward. Sir, can you hear me? You're at Mercy Point Regional Medical Center. You're safe. The man's gaze tracked slowly across the room, taking in the monitors, the IV lines, the sterile walls. His throat worked, testing vocal cords that hadn't been used in over 12 hours. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the gravel-edged authority of someone used to being obeyed. The surgeon. Where is she? Sandra exchanged glances with Dr. Patel. Sir, you were treated by our surgical team. The woman. His hand lifted slightly, gesturing to his left ear. Anchor tattoo. Behind her ear. Where is she? The room went absolutely silent. Nobody should have noticed a detail that small during a trauma surgery. Nobody except someone who'd been conscious enough to watch her work, and trained enough to catalog details even while dying. Dr. Patel cleared his throat carefully. Sir, can you tell us your name? The patient's eyes locked onto him with an intensity that made the young doctor step back instinctively. Where is she? Dr. Patel had worked ICU for 7 years and prided himself on maintaining professional composure. But when he finally processed the patient's recovered personal effects at 10:47 a.m., his hands started shaking. The military identification card had been damaged in the incident, blood-stained, partially torn, but the name was unmistakable. Lieutenant General James Marcus Donovan, United States Marine Corps, Special Operations Command. Sandra Martinez leaned over his shoulder and went absolutely pale. That's Reaper Donovan. Every military veteran in America knew that call sign. 3-star general, commander of Joint Special Operations Task Force, decorated in every major conflict since Desert Storm. The kind of military leader whose reputation preceded him into rooms where presidents made decisions about war and peace. And Victor Brennan had just fired the surgeon who'd saved his life. Dr. Patel picked up the phone with fingers that weren't quite steady. Get me hospital administration. Now. And someone find Director Brennan immediately. In the executive suite, Brennan was already drafting a press release about personnel changes when his assistant burst through the door without knocking. Sir, you need to come to ICU, right now. Something in her voice made him stand immediately. What happened? The patient from last night. We just identified him. 3 minutes later, Brennan stood in the ICU corridor reading the military ID card, watching color drain from his own reflection in the glass. His carefully constructed narrative, rogue surgeon endangering hospital liability, had just collided with catastrophic reality. He'd fired the doctor who saved one of the most powerful military commanders in the nation. Patricia from HR appeared beside him, tablet clutched to her chest. Victor, if this gets out, it won't. Brennan's voice carried the desperate authority of a man watching his career implode. We'll fix this. Quietly. Offer her the position back. Claim it was a misunderstanding. Administrative review. Something. Sir. Dr. Patel stepped into the hallway. The general is asking for her. Again. Brennan straightened his tie, assembled his most professional expression, and entered room 12. General Donovan was sitting upright despite medical orders, his chest bandaged but his eyes absolutely clear. This wasn't a confused post-surgical patient. This was a combat commander who'd made life-and-death decisions in war zones where hesitation cost lives. Mr. Brennan. The general's voice carried the gravel-edged authority of someone used to instant obedience. Where is the surgeon who saved me? Brennan cleared his throat, attempted his practiced corporate smile. General, I'm relieved to see you recovering. Our entire surgical team worked to... The woman with the anchor tattoo. The one who performed field surgery while your staff argued about paperwork. Donovan's eyes locked onto him like targeting lasers. Where is she? The silence stretched 3 heartbeats too long. Understanding flickered across the general's face. Not confusion, but cold recognition of exactly what kind of institution he was dealing with. You fired her. Not a question. An accusation delivered with the weight of absolute certainty. Brennan's prepared response died in his throat. Patricia took an involuntary step backward. There were protocol violations, liability concerns, Brennan began. She saved my life while you worried about lawsuits. Donovan's hand moved to the call button beside his bed. Get me my chief of staff, Colonel Sarah Vega. Now, General, I assure you we're already reviewing Dr. Cortez's termination. You're not reviewing anything. Donovan pressed the button 3 times in rapid succession. You're about to fix the biggest mistake of your administrative career. Or I will. 43 miles away, Elena sat at her kitchen table surrounded by printed job applications, her laptop open to hospital employment websites in Oregon and Washington. Her phone buzzed. Marcus Chen. Turn on the news. Channel 7, now. Elena grabbed the remote, switched to local news, and froze. The aerial footage showed Mercy Point Regional Medical Center surrounded by what looked like a military operation. News anchors were speculating about unconfirmed reports of a high-ranking military patient and unusual security presence. Her phone rang again. Marcus, voice urgent. Elena, they identified your patient. It's General James Donovan, and he's asking for you by name." Elena's world tilted sideways. What? He remembers everything. The hallway surgery, your tattoo. He knows Brennan fired you. Marcus paused. And from what I'm hearing, the general is about to make Brennan's life very, very difficult. Before Elena could respond, her doorbell rang. She opened it to find a woman in Marine Corps dress uniform standing at attention. Colonel rank insignia. Silver oak leaves gleaming against pressed fabric. Dr. Elena Cortez. The woman's voice carried battlefield command presence. "I'm Colonel Sarah Vega, Chief of Staff to General Donovan. The General requests your immediate presence at Mercy Point Regional Medical Center." Elena stared. "I was fired." "Not anymore." Vega's expression shifted into something approaching a smile. "General Donovan doesn't leave his Marines behind, and he's about to teach your former employer exactly what that means." The memory came to General James Donovan in fragments, sharp as the shrapnel that had nearly killed him. 72 hours earlier. Highway 36, 30 miles outside Colorado Springs. His unmarked SUV had been returning from a classified briefing at Peterson Space Force Base. 2 Marine security personnel in the front seats, Corporal Jake Moreno and Sergeant First Class David Chen, both hand-picked from his personal protection detail. The kind of Marines who'd walked through Fallujah and Helmand with Donovan, who understood that protecting their general wasn't just duty, it was family. The improvised explosive device detonated at 2147 hours. Military-grade construction. Remotely triggered. Designed to flip armored vehicles and kill everyone inside. What happened next took 11 seconds. Moreno threw the vehicle into evasive maneuvers while Chen returned suppressing fire toward the tree line, where muzzle flashes revealed their attackers. Donovan had recognized the ambush pattern immediately. Coordinated, professional, designed to eliminate high-value military targets. Domestic terrorist cell. The kind that had been threatening military leadership for months. The second explosion came from the passenger side. Shrapnel tore through reinforced plating like paper, shredding Chen's body before he could react. Moreno took 3 rounds to the chest while shielding Donovan with his own body, buying his general 5 precious seconds to survive. Both Marines died before the vehicle came to rest in a drainage ditch. Donovan had crawled from the wreckage with massive internal bleeding, his combat training overriding shock. Protocol dictated immediate silence. No identification, no confirmation of military status. Nothing that could compromise the mission or give terrorists confirmation of their target. When the civilian first responders arrived, he'd given them nothing. Not his name. Not his rank. Just enough consciousness to stay alive until the Marine medevac helicopter arrived. He'd expected military efficiency. What he got was Mercy Point Regional Medical Center and a masterclass in institutional cowardice. Now, lying in his ICU bed with Elena's emergency surgery keeping him alive, Donovan understood exactly what kind of surgeon she was. Colonel Sarah Vega entered his room carrying a tablet and the expression of someone who'd just reviewed a service record that demanded respect. She'd been Donovan's chief of staff for 6 years, knew his standards better than anyone. "Elena Maria Cortez," Vega began, pulling up the file. "Lieutenant Commander, United States Navy Medical Corps. 3 combat tours. First deployment, surgical unit attached to Marine Expeditionary Force, Kandahar Province." Donovan listened while Vega continued. 17 confirmed combat surgeries under direct fire. Navy Commendation Medal with Valor for treating wounded Marines during a sustained enemy assault. 2 Bronze Stars. Field promotion to Lieutenant Commander after she saved an entire platoon during a mass casualty incident in Syria. Syria. Donovan's voice was quiet. "What year?" 2018. "Why?" "Her brother." "What was his name?" Vega scrolled. Found it. Lieutenant Michael Cortez, Marine Infantry. Killed in action, Syria, 2018. Arterial bleeding following ambush. Died during delayed medical evacuation. The silence that followed carried the weight of shared understanding. Donovan had lost 73 Marines under his command across 3 decades. He remembered every name, every face, every death that could have been prevented. She left the service after her brother died. Vega continued. Civilian hospital work. Testified against budget cuts to veteran care 6 months ago, made enemies in administration, and saved my life while they argued about liability. Donovan's jaw tightened. That hospital administrator, Brennan, what do we know about him? Corporate climber, no military background, multiple complaints about retaliation against medical staff who challenged cost-cutting measures. This firing is his pattern. Donovan reached for his phone on the bedside table. His hands were steady despite the surgery, despite the pain medication. Some things were more important than physical comfort. "Sir, you need rest," Vega began. "I need Marines." Donovan's voice carried the gravel-edged authority that had commanded Special Operations Forces through impossible missions. "Every Marine within 200 miles, Mercy Point Regional Medical Center. Tomorrow morning, 0600 hours, full dress uniform." Vega's eyes widened slightly. "Sir, that's 400 Marines minimum. This isn't a request, Colonel. This is a debt." Donovan's finger hovered over the contact list. "Moreno and Chen died protecting me. Dr. Cortez saved me while bureaucrats protected their careers. We don't leave Marines behind. And she's one of ours." "Understood, General." Vega pulled out her own phone. "I'll coordinate transportation and formation protocols." Donovan made his first call to the commanding officer of Marine Corps Mountain Warfare Training Center, then Fort Carson Liaison, then every unit commander whose Marines could reach Colorado within 12 hours. His message was identical each time. "This is General Donovan. I need your Marines at Mercy Point Regional Medical Center tomorrow at 0600. A Navy surgeon saved my life and was fired for it. We're going to fix that. Are you in?" Every single answer was the same. "Semper Fi, sir. We'll be there." The first security guard noticed the movement at 4:47 a.m. Frank Vasquez, Mercy Point's night shift supervisor and former Marine gunnery sergeant, was reviewing surveillance monitors when headlights began appearing at the hospital's perimeter. Not the random pattern of early morning shift changes or emergency arrivals. These vehicles moved with coordinated precision, arriving in waves, parking in formation, engines cutting simultaneously. He switched camera angles and felt his breath catch. Military transport trucks, dozens of them, rolling into position around the hospital campus with mechanical efficiency that spoke of rehearsed operations and absolute discipline. "Jesus Christ," Frank whispered, reaching for his radio. "All units, we have military presence at every access point. I need eyes on all entrances, now." By 5:30 a.m., the transformation was complete, but still unfolding. Marines in dress blues emerged from vehicles in perfect silence. No shouted commands, no unnecessary movement, just the coordinated flow of warriors who'd trained together until precision became instinct. They formed ranks in the pre-dawn darkness. Row after row after row. 200, 300, 400 Marines standing at parade rest, their uniforms immaculate under the parking lot lights. Their presence so overwhelming it felt like the very air had changed density. At exactly 6 a.m., as the sun broke across the Colorado horizon, they came to attention as one. The sound of 400 boots striking pavement in unison echoed across the hospital campus like thunder. Inside Mercy Point, the morning shift arrived to chaos. Nurses pressed against windows, phones out, recording footage they couldn't quite process. Residents abandoned pre-rounds to witness what was happening outside. Even attending physicians who'd seen everything in 20-year careers found themselves speechless. "Oh my God," a third-floor nurse whispered. "It's for Elena." The story had spread through hospital staff overnight. The firing, the identity of the mystery patient. General Donovan's demand for her return. But nobody expected this. Nobody imagined the Marine Corps would mobilize 400 troops to make a point about institutional accountability. News helicopters arrived by 6:15 a.m., their cameras capturing aerial footage that would dominate every broadcast for the next 12 hours. The contrast was stunning. A civilian hospital surrounded by military precision, the ordered might of the United States Marine Corps, creating a perimeter that looked less like protection and more like occupation. Social media exploded within minutes. Where Mercy Point Hospital trended nationally, former service members recognized the formation patterns, understood exactly what message was being sent. The Marines don't abandon their own. Ever. In his executive office on the 4th floor, Victor Brennan stood frozen at the window, watching his carefully constructed world collapse in real time. His face had gone ash gray, his hands trembling against the glass as he counted impossible numbers of Marines. Patricia from HR appeared beside him, her voice barely a whisper. "Victor, we need to call the board. We need legal. We need to fix this." Brennan's voice cracked. "Before this becomes a national scandal." Too late. The main entrance doors opened, and Colonel Sarah Vega walked through, her stride measured and unhurried, her uniform carrying ribbons that spoke of deployments to places where hesitation cost lives. Behind her, 3 Marine officers followed in perfect formation. The hospital receptionist, who'd worked the front desk for 15 years, simply pointed toward the elevators without being asked. Some presences didn't require explanation. Vega rode to the ICU floor in silence, her expression neutral, but her eyes carrying the cold calculation of someone who'd coordinated operations in combat zones. When the doors opened, she walked directly to the charge nurse station. "I need Victor Brennan in room 12. Immediately. Tell him General Donovan is waiting." The charge nurse picked up the phone with shaking hands. 10 minutes later, Brennan entered the ICU room, his corporate confidence barely masking absolute terror. General Donovan sat upright in his hospital bed despite medical orders, chest bandaged but posture parade ground straight, surrounded by his command staff. The general's eyes locked onto Brennan with the intensity of someone who'd stared down terrorists and insurgents across 3 decades of warfare. "I'm told you fired the surgeon who saved my life." Donovan's voice carried gravel-edged authority that made the room feel smaller. "Explain." Brennan's rehearsed explanations died in his throat under General Donovan's unwavering stare. The ICU room felt smaller than it was, compressed by the presence of a man who'd commanded troops in 14 combat zones and recognized institutional cowardice when he saw it. "Dr. Cortez violated hospital protocol," Brennan managed, his voice lacking its usual corporate authority. "She performed unauthorized surgery without patient consent, without proper clearance. She saved my life while you debated liability." Donovan's words cut like surgical steel. "I was conscious for portions of that hallway surgery, Mr. Brennan. Do you want to know what I witnessed?" Brennan said nothing. Patricia from HR took an involuntary step toward the door. "I'll tell you anyway." Donovan's voice carried the gravel-edged precision of someone documenting facts for an after-action report. "I watched Dr. Cortez perform a lateral thoracotomy, using improvised equipment while my blood pressure crashed. She identified arterial damage through palpation alone. No imaging, no surgical suite, just her hands and 20 years of combat experience. She clamped the femoral artery using field techniques I've only seen in war zones, bought me 4 minutes of survival time while your staff argued about insurance verification." Colonel Vega stood silently in the corner, tablet recording every word. "That surgery," Donovan continued, "matched or exceeded anything I witnessed from Navy field surgeons in Afghanistan, Iraq, and Syria. She made 17 correct decisions in succession without hesitation, without supervision, under conditions that would paralyze most civilian physicians. And when she finished, I was alive. That is an indisputable medical fact." Brennan's face had gone from pale to gray. "General, I understand your gratitude, but institutional protocols exist for patient safety. Don't." The single word carried enough command presence to stop Brennan mid-sentence. "Don't hide behind policy when what you really mean is fear. I've commanded Marines in impossible situations. I know the difference between caution and cowardice. You, Mr. Brennan, fired a decorated combat surgeon for having the courage you lack." The silence that followed was absolute. "The hospital board is convening in 20 minutes, Patricia whispered to Brennan. "They're requesting your immediate presence." Donovan's expression didn't change. "I'll testify. Via video link from this bed, since your medical staff won't clear me to walk. And Mr. Brennan, I suggest you bring legal counsel." The emergency board meeting convened at 8 a.m. in the hospital's main conference room. 11 board members, hastily assembled, sat around a polished table while a 70-inch monitor displayed General Donovan's ICU room in high definition. The board chairman, Dr. Robert Chen, a retired Air Force physician who understood military culture better than anyone else in the room, opened the proceedings with barely concealed anger. "Mr. Brennan, you have 5 minutes to explain why you terminated Dr. Elena Cortez for saving the life of a 3-star general." Brennan stood, his prepared defense suddenly feeling hollow. Dr. Cortez violated fundamental hospital protocols. She performed invasive surgery without patient consent, without proper authorization, creating massive institutional liability. "Stop." Dr. Chen's voice was ice. "General Donovan, would you like to respond?" On screen, Donovan leaned forward slightly, despite obvious discomfort. Dr. Cortez's brother, Lieutenant Michael Cortez, died in Syria because medical evacuation was delayed by bureaucratic protocols. He bled out while administrators debated authorization. She left military service after that, determined never to let procedure kill someone she could save. 2 nights ago, she kept that promise. She saw me dying while your staff prioritized paperwork, and she acted with the decisive courage that defines military medicine. He paused, letting the words settle. "I've lost 73 Marines under my command across 3 decades. I remember every name, and I'm here today because Dr. Cortez refused to let me become number 74 while bureaucrats protected their careers." The room was silent, except for the quiet sound of board members typing notes. "Mr. Brennan," Dr. Chen said quietly, "you're terminated effective immediately. Dr. Cortez will be reinstated as Chief of Trauma Surgery with full back pay, benefits, and a formal institutional apology. Security will escort you from the building within the hour." Brennan's face went white. "You can't." "We already have." Dr. Chen stood, his Air Force bearing evident even in civilian clothes. "This meeting is adjourned." 43 miles away, Elena sat in her apartment, completely unaware that 400 Marines were standing outside a hospital demanding justice in her name. Her phone rang. Colonel Vega. "Dr. Cortez, you need to come to Mercy Point. Now." Elena stared at her phone, Colonel Vega's words still echoing in her mind. "You need to come to Mercy Point. Now." "I was fired," Elena said quietly. "I signed the termination papers yesterday." "Not anymore." Vega's voice carried absolute certainty. "The board just terminated Brennan and reinstated you as Chief of Trauma Surgery. Full back pay, benefits, formal apology." "But Dr. Cortez, that's not why you need to come." Elena felt her chest tighten. "Then why?" "Because 400 Marines are standing outside this hospital right now, and they're not leaving until they see you." The words made no sense. Elena walked to her window, phone pressed to her ear, as if she could somehow see Mercy Point from 43 miles away. "What are you talking about?" "General Donovan made some calls last night. Pull up any news channel. You'll understand." Elena grabbed her laptop with trembling hands, opened a news site, and froze. Aerial footage showed Mercy Point Regional Medical Center surrounded by Marines in dress blues. Row after perfect row, standing at attention. Their formation so precise, it looked like a military parade ground had materialized around a civilian hospital. The headline read, 400 Marines demand justice for fired Navy surgeon who saved general's life. Elena's vision blurred. She blinked hard, trying to process what she was seeing. The comments section scrolled past. Thousands of messages from veterans, active duty service members, civilians who understood that something fundamental was happening. This is what honor looks like. Marines don't abandon their own. That hospital fired a hero. Now they're learning what accountability means. "Dr. Cortez?" Vega's voice pulled her back. "General Donovan is waiting to meet you, and I think you should see what's happening here yourself." Elena changed into clean clothes with shaking hands. Not her scrubs, not her uniform, just jeans and a navy sweatshirt her brother had given her before his final deployment. She drove to Mercy Point in a daze, her mind unable to reconcile the Elena who'd been fired with the Elena that 400 Marines were standing for. When she turned onto the hospital access road at 9:47 a.m., she had to stop her car. The formation stretched across the entire campus. Marines stood at parade rest, their uniforms immaculate, their bearing flawless. News cameras lined the perimeter. Hospital staff filled every window, watching something none of them had ever witnessed. Colonel Vega appeared at her driver's side window. "Ready?" Elena couldn't speak. She just nodded. She walked through the main entrance in civilian clothes, feeling completely out of place, wondering if this was some surreal dream. Then she entered the main corridor. Every Marine she passed came to attention. Hands raised in salute, precise, simultaneous, honoring not her rank. She had none anymore, but what she'd done, who she was. Elena felt something crack open in her chest. Not grief, recognition. These warriors understood what hospital administrators never would. That saving lives sometimes meant breaking rules. That courage looked like kneeling in blood while others debated policy. Tears streamed down her face, but she kept her shoulders straight, kept walking through a corridor of honor she never expected to receive. Marcus Chen waited outside the ICU, his own eyes wet. He's waiting for you. Elena entered room 12 expecting formality. A general thanking a surgeon, professional and brief. Instead, General Donovan sat upright in his hospital bed, studying her with the intensity of someone who'd spent decades reading people in life-or-death situations. Dr. Cortez. His voice was quiet but carried absolute authority. How many Marines did you lose during your service? The question hit her like physical impact. Nobody asked that. Nobody wanted to know about the ones you couldn't save. 17. Her voice cracked. I remember every name. Donovan nodded slowly, something profound passing between them. So do I. That's why we do this. He gestured toward the window, toward 400 Marines standing in formation outside. You saved my life. But more than that, you honored every Marine who died because someone waited for permission instead of acting. Your brother, my Marines, every warrior who deserved a surgeon with your courage. He paused. We don't abandon our own. Ever. Elena couldn't speak through tears. She'd spent years carrying the weight of 17 names, believing she'd failed them. And now, a 3-star general was telling her that her refusal to let anyone else die that way mattered. That she mattered. The hospital auditorium had never held this many people. Staff packed the seats, Marines lined the walls in dress blues, and 3 news cameras captured every moment for national broadcast. Elena stood backstage, her hands trembling slightly as she adjusted the collar of her Navy uniform, the one she'd packed away years ago, but pulled out this morning because it felt right. Dr. Robert Chen, the board chairman, stood at the podium with the gravitas of someone who understood military honor. Today, Mercy Point Regional Medical Center corrects a grave injustice and establishes a new standard for emergency medical care. Elena walked onto the stage to thunderous applause. 400 Marines came to attention simultaneously, the sound echoing like a single drumbeat. Dr. Elena Cortez, Dr. Chen continued, you are hereby reinstated as Chief of Trauma Surgery with full authority to restructure our emergency protocols. This institution failed you. We will ensure it never fails another physician who acts with courage under crisis. Elena accepted the position with a handshake, but what mattered more was what came next. The Cortez Protocol, Dr. Chen announced, displaying the document on screens throughout the auditorium. Any attending physician may authorize emergency intervention without administrative approval when a patient's life is in immediate danger. Full liability protection guaranteed by this institution. Medical judgment supersedes bureaucratic process in life-threatening situations. The room erupted. Medical staff who'd watched Elena kneel in blood while administrators debated paperwork understood exactly what this meant. Permission to save lives without fear of institutional retaliation. Within 6 months, 47 hospitals across the nation adopted the protocol. Medical journals published case studies. Ethics committees cited it as the gold standard for balancing institutional safety with life-saving intervention. But the victory carried shadows. Investigation into Victor Brennan revealed a pattern of retaliation against medical staff who challenged his cost-cutting measures. 3 previous surgeons had quietly settled wrongful termination suits, their careers destroyed, their stories buried under non-disclosure agreements. Elena's case went public only because General Donovan refused to let it disappear. Brennan would never work in hospital administration again. But the physicians he'd destroyed before, Elena would never get their vindication. 6 months later, Elena sat before the Senate Committee on Veterans Affairs, testifying about medical bureaucracy and veteran care. The chamber was packed. Senators sat at their elevated bench, gallery seats filled with advocates, journalists, and military families. And in the front row, wearing his dress uniform with 3 stars gleaming on the shoulders, sat General James Donovan, fully recovered, back to active duty, and watching Elena with the pride of someone who'd found a warrior worth fighting for. My brother, Lieutenant Michael Cortez, died because medical evacuation was delayed by protocol, Elena said, her voice steady despite the emotion threatening to break through. He bled out while administrators prioritized authorization codes over arterial hemorrhage. He was 23 years old. He deserved better. She paused, gathering herself. Every veteran, every active duty service member, every warrior who puts their life on the line for this nation deserves medical care that prioritizes survival over procedure. The Cortez protocol exists because institutional fear should never again determine who lives and who dies. In the gallery, 400 Marines rose as one, silent, synchronized, honoring not just Elena, but every military medical professional who'd ever fought bureaucracy to save lives. General Donovan stood with them, hand over heart, his eyes locked on Elena with absolute respect. The message was unmistakable. Warriors recognized their own, and Elena Cortez would never stand alone again. 1 year after 400 Marines surrounded Mercy Point Regional Medical Center, Elena stood in the newly renovated Combat Medic Transition Center, a wing of the hospital that hadn't existed before her firing and reinstatement changed everything. The space hummed with purpose. Former Army medics practiced civilian trauma protocols alongside Navy corpsmen, learning to navigate electronic health records. Marine combat lifesavers sat in workshops about documentation requirements that would have seemed absurd in war zones, but defined survival in civilian hospitals. Elena moved through the training bay, her white coat carrying the Chief of Trauma Surgery insignia, stopping to adjust a young veteran's tourniquet technique. In the field, you had 30 seconds. Here, you have time to do it perfectly. Use it. The medic, barely 23, recently separated from service, nodded with the uncertain expression of someone learning to translate battlefield instincts into institutional requirements. Elena recognized that look. She'd worn it herself 5 years ago. Dr. Cortez. Marcus Chen appeared at the bay entrance. General Donovan just arrived. Elena smiled. Donovan visited every Tuesday, no longer as her patient, but as something more profound. A mentor, an advocate, a father figure who'd filled the void Michael's death had created. He'd retired from active duty 6 months ago, but wore purpose like other men wore uniforms. She found him in the mentorship lounge, surrounded by 3 combat medics struggling with PTSD and the impossible transition from saving lives under mortar fire to navigating insurance authorizations in sterile corridors. Donovan looked up when Elena entered, his eyes carrying the weathered wisdom of someone who'd commanded troops through impossible situations. Dr. Cortez, these Marines were just telling me about the challenges of civilian protocols. Challenges we're fixing, Elena said, joining the conversation. The Cortez protocol is spreading. 47 hospitals now. More every month. One of the medics, a former Navy corpsman named Rodriguez, spoke quietly. It's not just protocols, ma'am. It's knowing someone has our backs when we make the hard calls. Elena understood completely. The 400 Marines who'd stood outside Mercy Point had formed something unprecedented. An informal network that mobilized whenever a veteran medical professional faced institutional retaliation for doing what combat had trained them to do, act decisively when lives hung in the balance. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She almost ignored it, then saw the area code. Georgia. Dr. Cortez? The voice was young, female, trembling with barely controlled panic. My name is Captain Sarah Mitchell, Army medic. I was just fired from Atlanta Regional Medical for performing an emergency cricothyrotomy without authorization. The patient was choking, couldn't breathe. I had maybe 90 seconds before brain death. I saved him. They terminated me this morning. Elena's jaw tightened. Tell me everything. The story was horrifyingly familiar. Life-threatening emergency, administrative paralysis, a combat medic who acted with decisive courage, and institutional retaliation disguised as protocol enforcement. Captain Mitchell, Elena said quietly, you did the right thing. And you're not alone. She ended the call and looked at General Donovan. He was already pulling out his phone. That familiar expression of controlled fury settling across his features. Atlanta Regional Medical? He asked. Yes, sir. Donovan made 3 calls in rapid succession. First to the commander of Fort Benning, then to the Marine Corps liaison at Fort Stewart. Finally to a network of veteran advocates who'd stood with Elena a year ago. His message was identical each time. We have another one. Army medic. Fired for saving a life. Atlanta Regional Medical. I need bodies there by 0800 tomorrow. Within 2 hours, 200 veterans, Marines, Army, Navy, Air Force, were coordinating travel to Georgia. Not for publicity. Not for media attention. For the simple, unbreakable principle that warriors don't abandon their own. Elena called Captain Mitchell back. Help is coming. And when this is over, you have a job here at Mercy Point. We need medics like you. The young captain's voice cracked with relief, and something deeper. Recognition that she hadn't fought alone. That her courage mattered. That the family she'd thought she'd lost when she left the service had never really abandoned her at all. Donovan stood beside Elena, hand on her shoulder. You started something bigger than one hospital. One protocol. You reminded us what honor looks like. Elena thought of Michael. Of 17 Marines she couldn't save. Of the 400 who'd stood for her when she needed them most. No, sir, she said quietly. We did this together. That's what family means. 3 years after 400 Marines changed the trajectory of one surgeon's life. Elena stood in front of 200 medical students at Johns Hopkins University, teaching the case study that had become required curriculum in trauma programs nationwide. The Cortez protocol, she began, displaying the hallway surgery footage on the auditorium screen, isn't about me. It's about every physician who's ever faced an impossible choice between following rules and saving lives. The students watched in silence as the security camera captured Elena kneeling in blood, performing emergency surgery while administrators argued. When the video ended, a young woman in the 3rd row raised her hand. Doctor, Cortez, weren't you afraid of losing your career? Elena smiled. Terrified. But I was more afraid of becoming the kind of doctor who let someone die because I was too scared to act. My brother died that way, waiting for bureaucratic permission that came too late. I promised myself I'd never let that happen again. The Cortez protocol had been adopted by 127 hospitals across 17 countries. Medical ethics textbooks analyzed her decision. Trauma surgery programs used the footage to teach decisive intervention under crisis conditions. What started as one surgeon's refusal to wait for permission had become a global standard for emergency medical care. But the greatest transformation happened at Mercy Point itself. The hospital's newly dedicated Veterans Wing bore a bronze plaque that read, Elena Cortez Center for Combat Medical Excellence, where warriors heal warriors. Inside, former combat medics worked alongside civilian physicians, translating battlefield medicine into institutional care without losing the decisive courage that defined military medical service. General James Donovan walked beside Elena through the center he'd helped design after retiring from active duty. At 62, he moved with the controlled power of someone who'd spent 4 decades leading Marines through impossible situations and refused to stop serving just because he'd taken off the uniform. 17 new graduates this month, Donovan said, reviewing the roster of combat medics who'd completed the transition program. Every one of them employed. 0 facing institutional retaliation for doing their jobs. Elena felt pride swell in her chest. They'd built something that honored not just the Marines who stood for her, but every veteran medical professional who'd struggled to translate warrior instincts into civilian protocols. Her nonprofit, Veterans Medical Advocacy Network, had mobilized for 43 cases in 3 years. Army medics, Navy corpsmen, Air Force pararescue specialists, all fired for making the same choice Elena had made, acting with decisive courage when lives hung in the balance. None of them fought alone. The network ensured that. Dr. Cortez? Marcus Chen appeared at the training bay entrance, carrying an envelope with careful reverence. This came for you. From Iraq. Elena's hands trembled slightly as she opened it. The return address read, Family of Corporal David Ramirez, USMC. She remembered Ramirez, 20 years old, Massive head trauma from an IED blast. She'd worked on him for 47 minutes in a field hospital outside Fallujah, refusing to give up even when every medical indicator said he was gone. He'd died anyway, becoming number 12 on her list of 17. The letter was handwritten, the ink slightly smudged. Dr. Cortez, we finally learned your name from a Marine who served with David. We wanted you to know that our son's body came home whole because of your efforts. The Marine told us you fought for 47 minutes to save him, that you refused to quit, even when others said it was hopeless. That matters more than you'll ever know. You gave us a son we could bury with dignity. You cared when it would have been easier to walk away. Thank you for carrying his memory. Thank you for trying. Semper Fi, the Ramirez family. Elena's vision blurred. Donovan's hand settled on her shoulder with the weight of shared understanding. 2 warriors who carried names of the fallen, who understood that remembering mattered as much as saving. They all mattered, Donovan said quietly. The 17 you couldn't save, the hundreds you did. Every life you fought for, whether they survived or not. That's what honor looks like. Elena looked around the training center, at young veterans learning to channel warrior courage into civilian medicine, at the protocol that bore her name saving lives across the world, at the legacy built from one impossible choice on a blood-soaked hospital floor. She thought of Michael, of Corporal Ramirez and 16 others whose names she'd carry forever, of 400 Marines who'd stood in formation because warriors don't abandon their own. Some people wait for permission to do the right thing, Elena said, folding the letter carefully. Others just do it, and when they do, warriors recognize their own. Donovan nodded, his hand still on her shoulder. Not general and surgeon anymore. Family, the bond forged in blood and honor, and the unbreakable principle that some things matter more than career, more than safety, more than fear. Saving lives, keeping promises, never leaving anyone behind. That was the legacy. That was the choice. And Elena would make it again. Every single time.